Welcome to Extraterrestrial Reality. An apparent UFO crash that happened in New Mexico in 1945 really complicates the entire government cover-up that we've been talking about, that a lot of us know is ongoing for at least 75 years. It actually might be going on longer than that when you consider some of these other incidents. Now, just recently I was talking about alleged UFO crashes that occurred before Roswell, before the July 1947 Roswell incident. One of those cases was the 1897 Aurora, Texas crash, which was actually reported in two different newspapers at the time. And there was some kind of a craft crashed and blew up, and there was a being found that was not an inhabitant of this earth, according to the article at the time. And it was this being was buried in a local cemetery in Aurora, Texas, and then everyone forgot about it and moved on with life. It wasn't treated as a big deal. Maybe really what happened is that nobody really wanted to face the implications of this incident, and they just wanted to move on with their lives. Oh boy, something from outer space. Let's forget about it and think about something else. I don't know. I mean, maybe that's the reason it never really went anywhere. And then, of course, there was the 1941 incident. There was an incident that's been reported that happened near Cape Girardeau in Missouri in April of 1941, where apparently something crashed. Army personnel showed up. There were two dead aliens, and one of them was just hanging on to life and was about to die. And this local reverend was brought in to read last rites over this being. And then this reverend sworn to secrecy, but he went and told some of his family members anyway about what happened. And apparently some people in this town knew about it, but no one ever talked about it. And it was, decades later, the story came out. A granddaughter of this reverend was able to get information on from her grandmother, who happened to be the wife of the reverend, on her deathbed, and then but that's all we really have. There's not a lot of information about this one, but again, I guess it's possible. It's possible something crashed in Missouri in 1941, and then something else happened now in 1945. There's a story where and at least one of the witnesses still alive that saw this thing that crashed in New Mexico, actually only a month basically after the first atomic bomb test that happened in Alamogordo, New Mexico. And this is something that's been investigated by famous UFO investigator Jacques Vallee. Anyway, here's an article that appeared in the Daily Mail on December 29th. And I'm going to read some of this article. It says, exclusive, Pentagon ordered to reinvestigate 1945 crash of mysterious avocado-shaped UFO dubbed the Roswell before Roswell, as expert reveals eyewitness accounts of the encounter. Okay, we're going to read some of this. It says here, the government's UFO office has been ordered to reinvestigate an alleged 1945 crash of a strange object in New Mexico dubbed the Roswell before Roswell. A new military spending bill signed into law by President Biden last week was specifically amended to incorporate the intriguing case into a historic review of UFO incidents to be conducted by the Department of Defense. Jacques Vallee, a former contractor for the government's UFO office and the co-author of a book on the 1945 case, gave an exclusive interview to dailymail.com about it. Vallee, a renowned scientist and UFO investigator, was the inspiration for the French scientist character in Steven Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind, played by Francois Truffaut. In his interview, he described the alleged August 1945 crash of an avocado-shaped craft on the edge of the atomic bomb testing site near San Antonio, New Mexico, about 100 miles from the infamous Roswell crash 2 years later. The National Defense Authorization Act, which passed Congress this month, includes a section requiring the Department of Defense's All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, or AARO, to review and prepare a report on all previous government investigations of UFOs dating back to 1945. The bill's text previously only went back to 1947, but a late amendment changed it to 45. And here's what Vallee said. I was not involved in the drafting of the legislation, but several of my D.C. friends were, and they got the date of the investigation pushed back to 1945, Vallee told Daily Mail. Several of the congressmen involved have the book that Paola Harris and I wrote about our research at the alleged crash site called Trinity. Vallee and Italian UFO journalist Harris's 2021 book, Trinity, The Best Kept Secret, was re-released this year with new information and is mainly based around testimony of 3 witnesses, a B-52 bomber pilot and 2 young sons of a rancher on whose land the UFO supposedly crashed. So basically, this legislation that was recently passed, they actually changed the date back to January 1st, 1945. They want this investigation into these UFOs to go back further beyond Roswell because of this case. That's why they changed it, because there are witnesses to this case, and they want to. They think that should be part of the government investigation. Now, whether or not they're going to be able to get any information from the government on this crash, that remains to be seen. I'll talk about that later. But with regard to this crash, let's continue here with this article. The 2 researchers interviewed the family of Lieutenant Colonel William Brothy, who said he revealed in the years after the incident that he was sent out to survey the crash site on August 16th, 1945. The first witness was a bomber pilot who was coming in for landing at Alamogordo, the neighboring air base, Vallee told Daily Mail. He was asked by the controllers to look at a communication tower that had lost signal. He told the story to his family. His son gave us the recollection of what his father had described. Flying over, he saw the tower was bent as if it had been hit by something very hard, and then he saw in the vegetation some distance away a large egg-shaped object, and there were 2 little kids that he called Indians on their horses next to the object. Vallee said those 2 kids were Jose Padilla, 9, and Raymay Baca, 7. Padilla, now 86, became a highway patrol officer for 32 years, and Baca, who died in 2013, became a United States Marine and later a senior staffer for Washington Governor Dixie Lee Ray. They kept their story secret for more than 50 years, at last deciding to come forward in 2003 in an interview with a journalist from their hometown. So that's interesting. These two little witnesses, they were little kids at the time, and they waited all those years. The one guy's still alive, and he's in his 80s now. They waited all those years to tell their story to the public. Anyway, continuing here, it says, interviews with Vallee and Harris decades after the crash saw them describe stumbling across the wreckage of a craft while looking for a lost cow on Padilla's father's ranch by the Rio Grande on August 16, 1945. We heard this sound and the ground shook, Baca said in one interview. We saw smoke coming from maybe a couple of canyons down. We worked our way down the ridge. There was a gouge in the earth as long as a football field and a circular object at the end of it. It was the color of the old pot my mother was always trying to shine up, a dull metallic color. He said he could feel the heat from the crash through the soles of his shoes. Baca said he picked up a piece of foil-like metal that sprung back to its original shape when folded. Now let's just stop there for a second. So very similarly, there was material there that a lot of people who were witnesses to the Roswell crash, the same kind of foil type material that you could crumble it up and then it just straightens right back out again like magic. So that's the same kind of materials they're describing. And anyway, the story gets even better, though. It says, strange-looking creatures were moving around inside, he added. They looked under stress. They moved fast, as if they were able to will themselves from one position to another in an instant. They were shadowy and expressionless, but definitely living beings. They had big, bulgy eyes, 4 foot tall, and they were real thin, needle-thin arms. Their heads looked like Campamocha, which means praying mantis. They seemed like us, children, not dangerous, but we were scared and exhausted. The boys fled home on their horses and told Padilla's father what they had seen. Faustino Padilla told them it probably belonged to the army and to ignore it, but they persuaded him to check out the site 2 days later with state policeman Eddie Apodaca. Baca and Padilla said the craft was still there, but the debris was gone. The object covered with dirt, and the ground appeared to have been raked. Okay, well, let's just stop there for a second. Now, you have to wonder, so apparently somebody showed up from the military after these 2 kids saw this. If this story is true, then after these 2 kids saw this craft with the beings inside, somebody from the army obviously showed up. But they left the craft there. They didn't get it out of there yet. And you have to wonder, what happened to the beings? Were the beings still there when the military arrived, or did they get out of there? You have to wonder about that, too. We don't really know. The beings were still alive. The kids were looking inside. They could see these things moving inside the craft. They looked like they had heads like praying mantises. So these weren't your regular gray type things. These look like the praying mantis type things that are that we hear that seem to be in charge of the grays. And they were crashed there, and they were moving around, and they looked really strange, like they could move, like appear and disappear, like move from one part of the ship to another part instantaneously. That has to be very strange to see, but this is what they said they saw. Continuing here, it says, the next day, an army sergeant named Avila showed up at the ranch asking Faustino if they could cut out his fence, put in a gate, and grade a road to the crash site for a tractor trailer, Baca said. We have one of our experimental weather balloons that inadvertently fell on your property, Baca remembered the sergeant saying. So again, interesting. Weather balloon. You're using weather balloons even before Roswell. They're using that as an excuse. Again, if this story is true. Over the following week, the two boys snuck out to the site and used binoculars to spy on a unit of army officers who stood guard, loaded the 25 by 14 foot, roughly 5-ton avocado-shaped object onto a flatbed truck and covered it with blue tarpaulins, they told Harris. There was no sign of the creatures they claimed they saw earlier. On the last day, the boys plucked up the courage to sneak up and peek under the tarp while the young, bored soldiers were at lunch. Jose said, I think they're going to take it tonight. I said, yeah. How about a souvenir, Baca told Harris. Jose pulls part of the tarp off, exposing the gash on the side of the craft, while I hold the tarp open. Jose climbs into the gash. They described ridges inside every few feet, silvery colored strands like angel hair decorations, and a 2.5-foot metal panel attached to the rear wall with pins. No seals or anything, Baca said. It must have been cleaned out, or maybe there weren't any. Couldn't see any instruments like gauges, clocks, steering wheel, brake pedals, nothing like that. The plucky kids grabbed a crowbar from the tractor, used it to rip the large panel off the wall, and scurried off. They said they hid the metal under the floorboards of a nearby building and kept quiet about the case, fearing retribution by the army against their families, especially after officers came to search Faustino's house. Baca and Padilla eventually moved away and lost contact until 2002 when Baca reconnected with his old friend via a genealogy search. It was then they decided to tell their story. In 2015, Vallee had a spectroscopy analysis performed on the metal panel they said they recovered from the wreckage. It points to a mundane, man-made origin. The metal is aluminum, primarily alloyed to copper and silicon, the report by Frontier Analysis said, a mix often used for engine crankcases, gas and oil tanks, engine oil pans, blah, blah, blah. The foil-like metal that Baca claimed he picked up had been lost after he allegedly used it to fix a leaking pipe on the ranch as a boy. Anyway, I'm going to stop there. There's more to the article, but you can see where this is going. I guess the whole thing here, what's interesting about this now, I mean, Vallee is a really good researcher, and he has confidence in this story, or he wouldn't have spent a lot of time writing a book about it. And I've seen him talking about this in different interviews, and obviously people that he knows believe that this is something that's important too, or they wouldn't have changed the language in this new bill to include this investigation to go back to 1945 rather than start in 1947. But the whole thing is it complicates the whole situation. When I first started looking into this, it seemed like the crash happened. The first known crash was that the government looked into was the Roswell incident in 1947. But then you hear about this 1941 case in Missouri, and then you hear about this case in 1945, and it seems like the Army was involved in both of those cases too. Now, of course, the 1941 case doesn't have enough verification in it, but here you have one of these guys is still alive, still talking about it. And if it happened, okay, you have to wonder how did for one thing, we don't even know if those aliens were still there by the time the military showed up and started clearing things out. Were the aliens still there, or did some other ship show up and rescue them, get them out of there before the Army showed up? Who knows? So let's say that happened. Let's say that the aliens got out of there, but they did find the craft with no bodies, no aliens inside, and they recovered that craft. And now how would they have looked at that? Like would they have known? Would there have been scientists at the time working for the government that would have been able to look at that and determine this isn't of Earth. This is something that's extraterrestrial. Would that determination have been made, or and would they have? And if the 1941 incident was real, would the same conclusion been made? Oh, this is similar to that 1941 craft that we found. So obviously there's something extraterrestrial. So if those two cases are true, that means the cover-up actually started in 1941. Okay, if the 1941 incident isn't true, but the 1945 incident is true, then that means the cover-up really started in 1945. Like I heard Richard Dolan saying when he was talking about the 1941 case one time, he said that maybe the military would have stovepiped it. Basically, the government, they find this and they don't know what to think about it. They don't know what to do about it. So they're just, well, let's put this aside for later on. We're not going to tell anybody about it. There's nothing we can do. I don't know what to say. What can we do? I mean, we can't really tell people that there's extraterrestrials from other worlds coming here because, look what happened in 1938 with that War of the Worlds broadcast, right, from Orson Welles. I mean, that could have been the thinking at the time. I don't know. Or maybe that 1941 incident and the 1945 incident, maybe they weren't sure what it was. I mean, maybe they just couldn't, even scientists at the time might not have been able to make themselves come to believe that there's actual beings from outer space coming here. And maybe they thought it was something from a foreign country, some sort of weapon that they just need to try to figure out. They don't know what it is, but maybe we'll figure it out over time. Who knows what they were thinking? Because it's interesting how when you if those two things are true, and then you see how everything went down in 1947. You had the Kenneth Arnold sighting in June of 1947, right? Then everyone all of a sudden seen flying saucers all over the place. Now, was there anyone within the government at the time? Was Harry Truman aware of the other crashes? You would have to assume he would have been, right? Of these other things, did they already know in advance that these flying saucers were most likely the same kind of objects that had crashed in 1941 and 1945? It complicates the whole situation here. It really does. It really, because a lot of us, I for years, I didn't really know about the 1941 case, and I didn't really know about this case until much later on. Really, it seemed like it changes the whole narrative. The narrative changes because of this. It means that the cover-up started before Roswell. So it's more than 70. I'm always, screaming and hollering that 75 years they're covering this up. No, it actually could be a lot longer than that. Could be over 80 years now that they've been covering this up. I don't know, but it does complicate the narrative. It changes the narrative. And again, we don't know. We just don't know if these stories are true or not. We don't know. I mean, again, those other two stories, the 1941 case and then this 1945 case, they're different because there's not as many witnesses. However, we still have one witness who's still alive for the 1945 case. And there's just a lot we don't know about it. I mean, all we can go is by what these two witnesses, those two kids saw, really, and that one pilot. But I mean, the two kids and the one guy who's still alive. I mean, the fact that this is. I mean, why? I mean, they waited a long time. Maybe it would have been better if they would have come out in the 80s or late 70s, early 80s. When the Roswell thing exploded, they could have said, "Hey, they could have said, hold on a second, hold my beer, and come forward with their story then, because who knows, maybe there would have been more people alive that could have at that time that might have been maybe to help verify it. And again, we don't know were those aliens were still alive that they saw apparently. Right, they're rushing around inside this craft. What happened to them? I mean, that's all speculation. If they died, like say they died there, right, in 1945 before the military showed up, or even if they were still alive, did we actually have live aliens or dead aliens? Did our government actually have that before 1947? I mean, it really changes the whole narrative of the whole cover-up, really. I mean, now it seems like things really went into high gear. The cover-up most certainly went into high gear in 1947. It could have been the case that in 1941 and 1945, maybe they just thought these were one-offs. This ain't going to happen ever again, right? Then all of a sudden, flying saucers start showing up everywhere. Kenneth Arnold sees them, and then everyone else is seeing. Then all of a sudden, 2 weeks later, not even, I don't think, something crashes in Roswell. They're just, completely unprepared. And so that's why it was hard. You don't hear much about the crashes that happened after Roswell, well, because they didn't have that a system in place yet. Majestic 12 wasn't formed yet. They didn't have to do that yet. I mean, so that all came afterward, and that's why there was leaks. That's why there were people that were sitting on this, like Jesse Marcel Sr. for all these years before he came forward. But yeah, it's a very interesting case, and I recommend reading that full article. Check it out, and plus the book. I haven't read the book. I'm going to actually order that today. I think tonight when I get done with this podcast, I'm going to order that book because I haven't read that book, and it seems like something I really want to read, and find out more about